General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow had crossed a line she could no longer see. A line that once separated fear from control, compassion from cruelty, and love from something far more distorted. The moment Drew returned home, paralyzed and silent, she felt an intoxicating shift settle into her bones, a new kind of power she had never experienced before. It began subtly, almost innocently, with adjustments she claimed were necessary for his comfort, rearranging his room, filtering who could visit, insisting that only she understood his medical needs. But beneath every careful movement was a hunger growing inside her, a twisted satisfaction in knowing Drew was completely dependent on her, unable to resist, unable to speak, unable to expose the truth she carried like a secret flame. With every passing hour, Willow stepped deeper into a darkness that wrapped around her like a second skin, pushing her to test how much she could control, how far she could bend the world before anyone noticed it was her hands reshaping everything. Drew lay in the bed she positioned for him, trapped inside his own body, eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion, fear, and desperate awareness. He understood far too late that Willow had become something unrecognizable, a presence more suffocating than any physical restraint. She monitored his breathing, controlled his feeding schedule, dictated every second of his day with a precision that was not caregiving, it was ownership. Each time she leaned over him, brushing her hand through his hair with a softness too deliberate to be genuine, Drew felt the terror rising inside him. He could not cry out. He could not plead for help. He could not warn anyone that the woman beside him was no longer nurturing but predatory. And that helplessness became the foundation of Willow's growing obsession. But Willow's transformation did not stop at Drew's bedside. It radiated outward into Port Charles, affecting everything and everyone she touched. Friends felt a strange tension in her voice, a brittle tightness in her smile. Nurses sensed something off in the way she demanded private access to Drew's medical files. Even Michael, who always tried to see the best in her, noticed flashes of cold detachment when she spoke about Drew's condition. As though his suffering had become an inconvenience she found strangely satisfying. Willow learned to mask these shifts with trembling hands and soft-spoken explanations. But the cracks were already forming, and those cracks, if pushed the wrong way, would split open into something catastrophic. What made Willow even more dangerous was how methodical she became. Every decision she made had a purpose, restricting visitors so Drew couldn't signal distress, insisting that doctors reduce neurological testing so no one could track changes in his awareness, altering medications to keep him sedated at strategic moments. She wove her control around him like an invisible web, tightening it one strand at a time until Drew's very existence was shaped entirely by her whims. But she did it with such careful emotional camouflage that anyone watching from the outside might think she was simply overwhelmed, trying to manage more than she could handle. And she used that illusion like a weapon. Yet despite her confidence, Willow's mind was far from calm. Her thoughts raced at all hours, tangled and feverish, fueled by resentment and a twisted desire to punish Drew for every perceived slight, every fear that had ever burrowed into her. She blamed him for her instability, for her emotional collapse, for the life she believed he had tarnished. And now, with him motionless before her, she felt the seductive pull of revenge. She whispered to him when no one else was around, words soaked in venom, taunting him with secrets he could not challenge, confessing pieces of the truth just to watch the horror flicker in his helpless eyes. She reveled in his immobility, in his inability to fight back, in the knowledge that she held the power to destroy him further if she chose. But Willow underestimated one thing: how chaos spreads. Port Charles had a way of sensing danger before it fully manifested, like an instinctual collective heartbeat tightening in unease. Jason felt it first, an unnamed tension that pulled him toward the Quartermain mansion more than once. Carly noticed it next, watching Willow's movements with sharpened suspicion. Even Sonny, who rarely concerned himself with domestic tragedies, sensed a deeper threat lurking in Willow's shadow. Their instincts were not wrong. Willow's need for control was escalating, and with escalation came recklessness. She began making decisions too quickly, covering her tracks too sloppily, underestimating how closely others were watching. Meanwhile, Drew's internal turmoil grew unbearable. His mind screamed against the prison of his body, begging for release, for rescue, for someone to see the truth unfolding behind the closed doors Willow guarded so fiercely. Each time he tried to move even a fraction, Willow would appear instantly, smothering any attempt at independence with either feigned concern or cold warning. She kept him in a state of psychological torment, alternating between subtle kindness and chilling cruelty, conditioning him like a captive she intended to break completely. The shock that soon swept through Port Charles was not a single event, but a rising wave of growing awareness that Willow was spiraling into a psychological abyss. With no intention of climbing out, her behavior became sharper, her temper thinner, her lies more frequent. People who once dismissed suspicions as stress began to realize something darker was happening. And as Drew remained hidden away, deteriorating in silence, Willow's grip on reality began to fracture. Every choice she made pushed the town one step closer to disaster. Every secret she buried grew heavier beneath her feet. Every ounce of control she clung to pulled her deeper into madness. By the time Port Charles understood how dangerous Willow had become, her influence had already spread too far, her manipulation already too deeply embedded, her madness already too advanced, and the storm she unleashed was only just beginning. Drew remained trapped inside his unmoving body, fully conscious yet unable to scream, unable to warn anyone, unable to defend himself against the one person who was supposed to protect him. The world around him blurred into a haze of fear and helplessness, but nothing terrified him more than the presence hovering over him with soft smiles and poisoned intentions. Willow stood at his bedside like a quiet storm, beautiful on the surface, but deadly beneath. A woman who had slipped so far into darkness that even she no longer recognized how far she had fallen. Each time she adjusted his pillows, wiped his forehead, or whispered reassurances into his ear, Drew felt the same cold realization tearing deeper into him. She was the one who did this. She caused the stroke. She caused his paralysis. She may have even fired the weapon that left him broken. And now she was the only person he could not escape. For Willow, the illusion of control had become intoxicating. What began as a calculated cover-up had evolved into a twisted sense of power that she clung to more desperately each day. She relished Drew's silence, reveled in his inability to expose her, and manipulated every piece of his environment to reinforce her dominance. She controlled his medication, limited his visitors, and fabricated fragile excuses to ensure Jason, Carly, Alexis, or anyone who might notice the truth stayed just far enough away. The more she tightened her grip, the more invincible she felt. And yet, beneath her carefully curated composure, something vicious was growing, something reckless, something hungry, something she could no longer hide. The pressure she placed on Jason was deliberate. She knew Jason's protective instincts better than anyone. She knew he sensed something wrong, something unnatural about Drew's condition and her involvement. So she began attacking those instincts with calculated subtlety. Every time Jason asked questions, Willow countered with emotional manipulation, painting herself as overwhelmed, painting Drew as stable, painting Jason as intrusive. She tried to isolate him from the truth by preying on the very compassion that defined him. But with every attempt to mislead him, she accidentally fed his suspicion. The more she pushed him away, the more determined Jason became. And Willow felt the tightening coil of danger forming around her. As Jason silently tracked her every move, Alexis became Willow's second target. The moment Alexis gained temporary guardianship over Danny and Scout, Willow felt an unfamiliar panic ignite inside her. Alexis represented stability, law, and reason, everything Willow could not manipulate. So she began trying to undermine her as well, creating situations to make Alexis look careless, emotionally unstable, or overextended. She planted seeds of doubt, spinning half-truths whenever anyone asked about Alexis's involvement. But Alexis, seasoned by decades of surviving catastrophes, sensed the hostility woven beneath Willow's false kindness. And rather than shrinking back, she grew more alert, more protective, and more willing to confront the danger unfolding beneath the surface. But Willow's most reckless mistake came when she turned her attention to Danny. She underestimated him. She believed a child could be easily nudged into silence, easily confused into believing Drew's condition was normal. easily manipulated into thinking Willow was doing what was best. But Danny saw everything: Jason's tension, Willow's smiles that never reached her eyes, the way Drew looked terrified even though he couldn't move. Children often sense the truth long before adults dared to acknowledge it, and Willow's attempts to intimidate him, subtle, quiet, disguised as concern, only solidified Danny's fear that something was horribly wrong. With every person she tried to control, Willow stretched herself thinner. Her lies multiplied faster than she could maintain them. Her excuses became tangled, her behavior sharper, her emotional state more unstable, and the cracks in her facade began to spread like fractures in glass. Port Charles was changing. Because of her, its people growing more suspicious, its atmosphere growing heavier, the balance shifting inch by inch into chaos. Willow didn't realize she had become the epicenter of the town's unease, but everyone else felt it coming like a storm, quiet, slow, inevitable. Meanwhile, Drew remained the silent witness trapped inside the nightmare she created. He watched her pace the room with restless energy, watched her snap at the smallest inconvenience, watched her whisper threats under her breath when she believed he couldn't understand. At first, Drew feared her. Now he feared what she might become. Because with each passing day, Willow lost another piece of herself. The person she used to be, a gentle soul defined by compassion, was gone. What remained was someone driven by obsession, paranoia, and a need for control so absolute that she no longer cared about consequences. And consequences were coming. For every lie she told, Jason found an inconsistency. For every manipulation she attempted, Alexis uncovered a contradiction. For every moment she tried to silence Danny, the boy grew more determined to speak to Jason. The pressure Willow managed to exert on others began circling back toward her with force. The more she tightened her grip, the more the world around her pulled against it. Panic began creeping into her eyes. Rage began simmering beneath her voice. And the dark truth she once controlled started slipping through her fingers like water. The backlash was no longer a possibility, it was a certainty. Because once Jason, Alexis, and Danny connected their pieces of the puzzle, Willow would become the center of a disaster so catastrophic that even she wouldn't be able to escape. Drew would not remain silent forever. Jason would not remain patient forever. And Port Charles would not remain blind forever. Willow had set the storm in motion. Now the storm was turning back toward her. And when it finally hit, the destruction would be unlike anything the town had ever seen. Willow had reached a point where fear no longer guided her actions, power did. The moment she realized no one suspected the depth of her involvement in Drew's collapse, something shifted inside her. A dangerous confidence began to bloom, the kind that whispered she could rewrite the story, reshape the world, punish those who had failed her, and take control of every narrative that once left her powerless. Willow was no longer reacting to chaos, she was orchestrating it. And each calculated step she took proved that she was embracing a version of herself, far more ruthless than anyone in Port Charles had ever imagined. Her newfound authority over Drew became the foundation of this transformation. Watching him unable to move, unable to speak, unable to fight back awakened something cold and determined inside her, a confirmation that control, once tasted, was addictive. She justified her actions at first, convincing herself that Drew had brought this fate upon himself, that he deserved to feel the helplessness she had carried for years. But soon, the justifications vanished. What remained was desire, pure, hardened desire to reclaim the power she had been denied by fate, by circumstance, by the people who underestimated her. And with power came revenge. Willow began examining the town not as a community she belonged to, but as a landscape of individuals who could either be manipulated or destroyed. Those who once mattered to her, Jason, Carly, Alexis, even Michael, were no longer emotional anchors, but obstacles she needed to manage. She started calculating how to weaken them, how to keep them distracted, how to ensure they questioned themselves before they ever questioned her. Every conversation became a chess move. Every smile hid an ulterior motive. Every tear she shed was a weapon deployed with precision. This was not the Willow the town believed they knew. This was a woman shedding innocence like a discarded mask. Her evolving role in Port Charles became impossible to ignore. She was no longer the fragile heart patient, no longer the grieving mother, no longer the gentle mediator caught between conflict and tragedy. She was shifting into something formidable, someone who could influence events with quiet but devastating force. She cultivated relationships carefully, isolating herself only when it gave her tighter control over Drew's fate, then stepping into public space with the same delicate facade she used to conceal her intentions. The contrast between who she appeared to be and who she had become was so stark that it created a tension in the air, a sense that something catastrophic was building just beyond the town's awareness. And the shocking part was how smoothly Willow adapted to her new role. She did not stumble. She evolved. She did not regret. She recalculated. She did not fear exposure. She anticipated it and prepared counterattacks. Because with each lie she crafted, each manipulation she executed, each moment she stood over Drew's immobilized body, Willow grew more certain that she was untouchable. She believed she had surpassed the version of herself who suffered in silence, who relied on others to save her, who remained at the mercy of circumstances. Now she was the circumstance, the catalyst, the danger, the force that would reshape Port Charles whether anyone liked it or not. But beneath this new power, beneath the cold determination, was an undeniable truth. Willow was unraveling. Her desire for revenge was not strategy, it was obsession. Her rise to power was not ascension, it was descent. And the more she fed that darkness, the deeper she was pulled into its gravity. This was the new shock Port Charles would face. Not the revelation that Willow had harmed Drew, not the whispers that she had manipulated the court, not even the suspicion that she had fired the gun. The true shock was this: Willow was no longer hiding. She was transforming. And Port Charles, unprepared and unsuspecting, was about to face the consequences of a woman who had discovered she liked the taste of power and had no intention of letting it go. If you want, I can continue the next part where Jason begins to sense the change, or where Drew starts regaining small movements, or where Willow makes her first major public mistake that exposes everything.